The train doors closed with a tired sound, and the air inside was heavy with silence. People avoided each other's eyes, lost in their own troubles. A young man sat near the corner, his shoulders shaking slightly, as if he was carrying a weight no one could see. Across from him, an older woman clutched her shopping bag tightly, her hands trembling, her face filled with quiet worry. Everyone noticed, but no one moved on. Then a figure stepped inside. Keanu Reeves, dressed simply in a black jacket, walked in without making any noise. At first, no one recognized him. He didn't act like a star, didn't carry himself with pride. He just looked like another passenger, blending into the moment. But the silence in the train began to shift the moment he gently offered his seat to the older woman. She hesitated, embarrassed, but his soft smile reassured her. He didn't say much, only, "Please, sit. You need it more than I do." The woman sat down slowly, her lips trembling as she whispered thank you. What surprised everyone wasn't just the act, but the way Keanu made it feel normal, as if kindness was the easiest thing to do. The tired young man looked up for the first time, his red eyes meeting Keanu's calm face. Something in that quiet exchange felt like a spark of hope. In that moment, phones began to come out. People realized who he was, but Keanu didn't care. About the stairs, he leaned slightly toward the young man and asked, "You okay?" The question was simple, but it broke through the boy's wall. Tears slipped down his face, and he nodded. Keanu didn't push further, didn't demand a story. He just placed his hand gently on the boy's shoulder, the way a friend would. That moment became unforgettable. Fans who saw it whispered later how it felt like time slowed down. In a world where most celebrities rushed past with bodyguards and cameras, Keanu sat quietly beside a stranger, not worried about his image, not worried about being noticed. But this was not the first time something like this had happened. Years earlier, on a movie set, a crew member was struggling with his long shift. The heat was unbearable, and while others complained, Keanu disappeared for a moment and returned with water bottles, handing them out one by one. No announcement, no show. He just acted, quietly making sure everyone was cared for. The crew member later said, "He didn't treat us like workers. He treated us like equals." What fans can't forget is not just the act of giving, but the emotion behind it. Keanu's humility was not staged when he gave up his time, his seat, or even his silence. It carried a power stronger than any fame, and yet, the story does not end with small gestures. Because hidden behind his calm kindness are moments of conflict, moments where the world tried to test his patience. Not everyone respects kindness. Some people see humility as weakness, and Keanu faced such a test one evening, when a group of strangers laughed at his simple clothes during a charity dinner. Instead of reacting with anger, he smiled softly and said, "It is better to be known for kindness than for what you wear." His words silenced the table. Those who mocked him felt the sting of truth, and those who admired him found a deeper respect. That dinner was remembered not because of glamour, but because of a sentence that carried humility and strength together. Fans who heard about it never forgot, because it proved that kindness can shine even when it is challenged. And so, as this journey begins, we are not just talking about a man who stars in movies. We are entering the story of a human being who teaches through action, not speeches. We are about to see how random moments, simple choices, and quiet courage built a memory that fans will never let go. Because kindness, when done with no need for praise, becomes unforgettable. And Keanu Reeves, through his humility, has given the world more than roles on screen. He has given a lesson in being human. To understand this lesson fully, we must follow the moments one by one, each more powerful than the last, until we see why fans across the world hold on to these memories with such emotion. This is the beginning, and what comes next will reveal even deeper truths, hidden behind the gentle smile of a man who never asked to be called a hero. It was a late evening. In New York, the rain had just stopped, leaving the streets wet and shining under the yellow glow of streetlights. People hurried past with umbrellas, taxi horns echoed in the distance, and the city moved as if it had no time to breathe. In the middle of this restless rhythm, Keanu walked quietly, unnoticed. His jacket pulled close against the cool air. He had just left a meeting that was supposed to be glamorous, full of faces dressed in expensive clothes, full of laughter that sounded empty. During the evening, he had sat at a long table surrounded by people who talked loudly about their wealth. He had smiled politely, answered when spoken to, but deep inside, he felt far away from it. What stayed with him wasn't the food or the laughter, but the look of a young waiter rushing between the tables, his face pale, his movements sharp with worry. Keanu had noticed the boy stumble when someone snapped fingers impatiently. A glass nearly slipped, and instead of helping, some guests chuckled at him. The boy muttered an apology, his eyes red, but no one cared. Keanu watched silently, his heart tightening, and for the rest of the evening, his attention remained on the boy instead of the noise around him. When the dinner ended and the crowd scattered into their cars, Keanu stayed behind. He walked over to the boy, who was gathering plates quickly, his hands trembling. "Long night?" Keanu asked softly. The boy froze, realizing who was standing there. He nodded quickly, unable to form words. Keanu smiled, not the smile of a celebrity, but of a man who understood exhaustion. "You did well," he said simply. The boy shook his head. "I messed up. I can't afford to lose this job." His voice cracked. Keanu placed his hand gently on the boy's shoulder and whispered, "One mistake doesn't define you." The boy's eyes filled with tears. No one had told him that tonight. No one had seen him, except this stranger who the world admired, but who now stood quietly, giving him respect. Before leaving, Keanu slipped an envelope into the boy's hand. The boy tried to refuse, panicked, but Keanu whispered again, "Use it to rest. Tomorrow will be better." When the boy opened it later, his hands shook hard inside. It was enough money to pay off the debt that had been crushing his family. That story never made headlines. There were no cameras, no interviews, no proof except for the memory of that boy, who would later tell his friends. "He saved me that night, not with money, but with words that healed me." But this was not the only night that tested Keanu's patience. A week later, he was traveling by train again, a quiet ride late in the evening. The train stopped suddenly, lights flickering. People grumbled, tired, frustrated. Across the aisle, a man in a wrinkled suit sat with his head in his hands. His phone lit up with messages he didn't answer. Keanu noticed the shaking of his shoulders, the same silent weight he had seen before. Instead of ignoring it, Keanu leaned closer and said softly, "Rough day." The man looked up, startled, and then recognized him. His lips parted, but words failed. Keanu continued, "Sometimes, the world doesn't give us what we deserve, but that doesn't mean we stop moving forward." The man whispered, "I lost my job today." The words hung heavy in the still air of the train. Everyone nearby heard but pretended not to. Keanu nodded slowly. "Then maybe today is not an ending. Maybe it is the start of something you haven't seen yet." Those who sat around felt the weight of the moment. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed that they had looked away. One woman later said, "It wasn't his fame that made us listen. It was the way he spoke, as if he had felt the same pain." And the truth was, he hid behind his calm voice, behind the humble acts. Keanu carried his own scars. He had lost people he loved, faced loneliness deeper than the public could imagine. But instead of letting pain harden him, he turned it into kindness. And that night on the train, a stranger who had lost hope found the courage to stand up again. Just because one man refused to stay silent, asterisk fans can't forget these acts, because they are not acts of performance, they are pieces of humanity, given freely, in moments when no one expects it. Keanu did not need to lift the world. He only needed to lift one person at a time. And yet, even as these moments inspired countless people, there were those who doubted him, those who whispered that his kindness was staged. And soon, an unexpected encounter would challenge him in a way he had never faced before, an encounter that would reveal just how much humility can withstand, even when mocked and misunderstood. The evening was filled with noise, cameras flashing in every direction. It was a charity gala, a place where people came to be seen more than to help. The hall glittered with diamonds, silk dresses, and laughter that felt sharp rather than warm. Keanu walked in quietly, wearing a simple black suit. Compared to the others, his clothes looked modest, almost out of place. As soon as he entered, whispers began. Some admired his presence, but a few, eager for attention, smirked and nudged each other. One man in particular, a businessman known for showing off, laughed loudly and said, "You'd think someone like him could afford better clothes." The comment was meant to sting, and it echoed across the room. People paused, unsure how he would react. For a moment Keanu stood silently. He looked at the man, then at the faces watching, waiting for drama. But instead of anger, he smiled softly. His voice was calm, almost gentle, when he said, "Clothes are not who we are. Respect is what we carry with us, not what we wear." The room fell into silence. The man who mocked him shifted uncomfortably, his arrogance shrinking under the weight of those words. Some guests lowered their heads, ashamed of their own laughter, and slowly, quiet applause began from a corner of the room. It spread, until many were clapping not for the suit, not for the fame, but for the humility that reminded them of something they had forgotten. But the night held more than one test. Later, during the dinner, a young woman who worked for the event struggled to carry a tray. Her hands shook, and a glass slipped, shattering on the floor. The sound made everyone turn. Embarrassment flushed her face, and whispers started again. The same man who mocked earlier chuckled. "Seems like tonight is full of mistakes." Before she could bend to pick up the pieces, Keanu stood and knelt beside her. He gathered the shards carefully with his own hands, ignoring the gasps around the table. The woman tried to stop him, horrified, but he looked at her and said quietly, "It's okay. Accidents happen to all of us." Those watching were stunned. A man of his stature, kneeling on the floor, helping someone others dismissed as invisible. In that instant, the power in the room shifted. It was no longer about wealth or fame, it was about dignity. Later, when he walked out into the night, the young woman caught up with him, tears in her eyes. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Keanu smiled and replied, "That's exactly why I did." The story spread, not through the news, but through the people who were there. Those who witnessed it carried it in their hearts. Because It was a reminder that true respect is shown not in front of cameras, but in the moments when no one expects it. Yet, even as these stories grew, the whispers of doubt followed him. Some still claimed his kindness was a mask, a way to keep his image clean. They couldn't believe that someone could be humble in a world so full of pride. And soon, another test would come, this one far harsher, more personal, because kindness, when challenged directly, must either stand strong or crumble. And Keanu was about to face a moment where his patience, his humility, and even his silence would be pushed to the edge. The night was cold, and the city lights burned bright against the dark sky. A talk show was being filmed live. The studio, packed with people waiting for entertainment. The host was famous for sharp humor, the kind that often made fun of guests to get quick laughter from the audience. That evening, Keanu was the guest. When he walked onto the stage, the crowd cheered. Many admired him, but the host leaned back in his chair with a smirk. So, the host began, "The internet calls you the nicest man in Hollywood. Tell me, is that because you don't know how to say no?" The audience laughed. Keanu smiled. Softly, not offended. "No," he answered. "It's because kindness doesn't cost anything." His words were calm, but the host was not done. "Come on," the host pushed. "You give up your subway seat. You pick up garbage on movie sets. You share your money. What are you trying to prove? Maybe you're just playing the saint so everyone loves you." The laughter grew louder. Cameras zoomed in. It was a test, public, sharp, designed to corner him. For a moment, the studio held its breath, waiting for him to defend himself or get angry. But Keanu leaned forward gently, his eyes kind, his voice steady. "If people only give when they want to be seen, it is not kindness, it is performance. I do not care about being seen. I care about helping when I can. If that looks unusual, then maybe the world needs more of it." The crowd fell silent. The host tried to smile, but his face faltered. One clap began in the audience, then another, until the entire room filled with applause, not for a joke, not for a dramatic fight, but for humility that could not be shaken. After the show ended, a man from the audience found Keanu outside. He looked nervous, holding a letter in his hand. "I lost my wife last year," he said, his voice trembling, "and tonight, when you said the world needs more kindness, it felt like you were speaking to me. Thank you." Keanu took the letter, with both hands, looked the man in the eyes, and said, "Your pain is real. Don't let the world make you feel alone in it." The man wept, and in that moment, strangers passing by stopped to watch, not because they saw a star, but because they saw a human being giving his heart to another. The twist of the evening was not that Keanu was mocked, but that the attempt to belittle him only revealed his strength. Humility is not weakness, it is a shield stronger than pride. Those who laughed left the studio thinking about their own actions, their own choices, but life does not give rest to those who choose kindness. The next challenge would not come from a stage or a camera, it would come from the street, from a moment raw and unexpected when danger touched the life of a stranger. And Keanu's decision would change everything. The city was restless that evening. Neon lights flickered across wet sidewalks, cars rushed past, and voices blended into a constant hum. Keanu was walking home quietly after meeting a friend. He liked walking without attention, blending into the crowd, unnoticed in his simple jacket top. But just a few blocks away, voices rose, sharply angry, uneven. At first it sounded like a normal argument, but then came the sound of fear. A young man was cornered near a wall, his backpack pulled tightly against his chest. Two men stood in front of him, shouting, their tone filled with threat. People passed quickly, eyes averted, choosing not to get involved. Keanu slowed. His heart raced, not because he wanted to be a hero, but because he couldn't walk away. He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Hey," he said softly, "is everything okay here?" The men turned, surprised. They recognized him instantly. One of them laughed bitterly. "Look at this Hollywood star wants to play savior." The other pushed the boy harder against the wall. The crowd around grew. Phones came out, but no one moved forward. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He looked straight at the men and said, "He doesn't deserve this. None of us do. Let him go." His words weren't a command. They were almost gentle, but they carried weight. The boy's eyes filled with tears, whispering, "Please." For a tense moment, it seemed the men would not listen. But something in Keanu's calmness unsettled them. They muttered curses and finally shoved the boy aside before storming off into the night. The boy collapsed to the ground, shaking. Keanu knelt beside him, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. "You're safe now," he whispered. "You're not alone." The boy clutched his backpack, whispering, "I thought no one would stop." Keanu's eyes softened. Sometimes all it takes is one person to step forward. The moment was captured by someone in the crowd, but the story that spread later was not about a celebrity saving the day. It was about courage mixed with kindness, about choosing to stand when others stayed silent. Later that night, Keanu walked home in silence, thinking about how fragile the world felt, how quickly fear can swallow someone's hope. He remembered his own past, the moments when he felt powerless, when grief had stolen his voice. Maybe that was why he couldn't ignore others, because he knew what it meant to feel unseen. The boy, days later, wrote online, "He didn't just protect me. He reminded me that there are still people who care." Thousands shared the words, But for Keanu, it was never about the sharing. It was about the boy's trembling hands, finally finding peace. Yet this act would draw more eyes to him, and with more eyes came more tests. People admired him, but some envied him, and envy can be cruel. The next chapter in his journey would show how even kindness, when faced with jealousy and bitterness, can still shine brighter than any darkness. The news of Keanu's quiet act on the street spread faster than he expected. Strangers whispered about it in cafes, online posts praised him, and once again, the world called him the kindest man in Hollywood. But with praise came shadows. Some doubted, some mocked, some said no one could be that humble without hiding something, and whispers of jealousy began to follow him like shadows. One evening, at a public event meant to honor charity work, Keanu found himself standing on stage with others. The hall was filled with applause, but not everyone in the room clapped with sincerity. Among the guests was a critic known for his sharp words, a man who believed kindness was weakness. During the discussion, the critic stood and raised his voice. "Everyone praises you," he said, his tone heavy with sarcasm, "but maybe it's time we stop pretending. Are you really kind? Or is this all a mask you wear because your career needs it?" The room grew tense. Cameras pointed. People leaned forward, waiting for drama. For a long moment, Keanu stayed silent, his eyes lowered, his hands folded gently. Then, in a voice soft but steady, he spoke. "A mask is worn to hide. Kindness is shown to heal. I don't need the world to believe me. I only need the person who has helped to feel seen." The hall grew still. The critic smirked, but his smirk faltered when an older woman stood up in the audience. Her voice shook, but it carried weight. "Years ago, I fell on a subway stair," she said. "No one stopped, except him. He didn't know who I was, and I didn't know who he was. But he gave me his hand, and in that moment, I felt human again." Murmurs filled the hall. Then another voice rose, a man near the back. "My son met him when he lost his job. He gave him hope when none of us could." One by one, voices rose across the room, stories of kindness no cameras had captured, moments Keanu never spoke about. The critic had no words. The applause that followed was not just noise, it was respect, raw and true. Keanu stood there, his eyes glistening with quiet emotion, not proud, not triumphant, but humbled by the reminder that small acts, unseen and forgotten by him, had lived forever in others. Later, when the hall was empty, he walked alone into the night air. The city was alive around him, bright and restless, but he felt a calm inside. He sat on a bench, watching strangers pass. A little girl ran by, holding her father's hand, her laughter bright. Keanu smiled, because in her laughter he saw the future untouched, full of possibility. He thought of the boy on the train, the waiter at the dinner, the man who lost his job, the woman on the subway stairs, the stranger he had defended on the street. All of them were different, yet all of them carried the same truth. Kindness had given them strength when the world turned away. And maybe that was the real legacy, not the movies, not the fame, but the quiet choices that built memories in others' hearts. He whispered to himself, almost like a promise. "If the only thing I leave behind is kindness, that will be enough." The night grew deeper, but he stayed on the bench a little longer, letting the silence speak louder than words. Because sometimes, the greatest stories are not shouted, they are lived quietly, in moments that fans and strangers alike can never forget.